If you're like me and you've been using an Android phone for years, but you also own Apple products such as MacBooks or an iPad, then you've probably been at least considering switching to an iPhone for a little while. Apple just announced their iPhone 15 lineup, with some key changes such as moving from their Lightning connector to USB-C. So in this episode of TechFocus, I'm going to cover what's new in the iPhone 15 lineup before trying to answer the question of whether these changes are enough and ultimately whether it's finally time to switch from Android to iPhone. If you already know all the updates to the iPhone 15 lineup and you're not interested in my take on this, then you're welcome to use the timestamps to skip to the part you're interested in. So, without further ado, let's crack on. So the Apple event happened on Tuesday, and the main announcements were the release of two new smartwatches, so the Series 9 and the Ultra 2, as well as the new iPhone 15 lineup, so the 15, the 15 Plus, the 15 Pro, and the 15 Pro Max. I'm actually not going to cover the watch updates in this episode because I'm more interested in the iPhone updates, and there are plenty of videos out there covering the full watch updates if you want to check them out. These updates can be summarized in one sentence as new, more powerful chips, higher brightness screens, and a new double tap feature that allows you to tap your index finger and thumb together twice in quick succession to select whatever the primary button on the screen of the Apple Watch is. Okay, so let's move on to the iPhone 15 announcements. I think it's best to cover the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus updates first, and then we can cover what's different between the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max to the base models. So the first update to the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus is a slightly altered design. Apple have obviously described this as an all new, brand new design, but it's really minor updates. But these are nice updates in my opinion. First of all, you have a slightly altered back design, and I think this looks quite cool. It's got basically frosted kind of matte glass is how I would describe it, and it tapers up to the camera bump really nicely and makes it look a little bit more sleek. The downside of this is it gives you more kind of muted colors, so you get 5 different colors with the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus. So these new colors are black, blue, green, yellow, and pink. And I think the yellow, green, and pink don't look that great. I quite like the blue, and I think personally, if I was going to buy one of these, I would go with the black. I think I just quite like the matte black look. So it looks kind of cool in black, in my opinion. But it would be nice to have some more punchy colors, like the product red version of different iPhones that they've had in the past, which look really punchy and really nice. That kind of really strong red color. But yeah, you get this kind of new design, and that's kind of what it is. The other main part of the design is you get Dynamic Island now in the base model iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, whereas that was reserved for the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max in the previous generation. And with Dynamic Island, you get some new features. So you now have the option to show multiple bits of information at once. So for example, you can have something like your Uber Eats delivery and when that's due on one side, and you can also have, if you're on a phone call, you can have the phone call icon on the other side, so you can tap into each as you want to, which is just a nice quality of life update to Dynamic Island, and it's going to make a good difference to how it works and the functionality. I do think the Dynamic Island design looks a lot better than the notch, even though it's very subtle and not much of a big difference, but it does give you some actual functionality to that section of the screen as well, which is good. So the last thing in terms of design is they've rounded the edges of the iPhone 15, whereas in the iPhone 14, these edges were quite sharp and quite uncomfortable to hold. So this will make it a little bit more comfortable to hold while maintaining that design language of the iPhone 14. They've also made an update to the display on the iPhone 15, and it now has 2000 nits of peak brightness in outdoor situations, which is really good. Like that 2000 nits is an insane number, so it's going to be really bright, and that's kind of nuts. They haven't changed anything else about the screen, so it's still 6.1 inches for the iPhone 15, 6.7 inches for the iPhone 15 Plus, and it's still limited to 60 Hertz, which is not great. So that could be a deal breaker for some people, that it is still limited to 60 Hertz if you're used to 90 Hertz or 120 Hertz, and it's a lot smoother. In terms of the brightness, 2000 nits is just for outdoor brightness. Peak brightness for HDR content is 1600, and typical peak brightness is 1000. The next update is to the camera system, and this is fairly major update because it's the first time they're bringing a 48 megapixel main camera into the base model iPhone. So the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus are getting a 48 megapixel main camera, and this is going to be a 26mm equivalent, which might not be wide enough for some, but getting that 48 megapixels is going to be great. It looks like it's using what's called a quad Bayer sensor, which uses groups of 4 pixels, and then it's going to be oversampling those 4 pixels into basically 24 megapixels rather than 12 megapixel images. So you're getting 24 megapixel images as standard on the iPhone now rather than 12 megapixel images that you got before, and that's hopefully going to give you a bit more detail in all your photos. But you also do have the option to shoot 48 megapixel HEIF images and ProRAW at 48 megapixels if you want to as well. But by default, they are oversampled down to 24 megapixels. Apple's boasting 3 optical quality zoom levels on the iPhone 15, and that's not technically true. So first of all, you get the 48 megapixel main camera, the full frame, which would be 26 millimeters. You'd get the ultra wide, which is 12 megapixel camera this year. Again, the same one that was on the previous generation, and that's at 13 millimeters. And then they're saying that it's optical quality level when you do 2x telephoto, but it's not actually. It's digitally zoomed in or cropped in. So you end up with actually a 12 megapixel image when you crop into 2x because it's cropping on the 24 megapixels that you have left on your sensor effectively. So it's not technically optical quality. It's a classic Apple marketing just saying that, but it's going to be lower quality than your 48 megapixel full 1x shots that you take. Another pretty cool feature this year that you're getting is the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, as well as the Pro iPhones, are going to be capturing all kind of depth data and focus data when you take every photo. So this means that you can actually refocus after you've taken the shot, and you can add portrait mode after you've taken the shot as well. So you can choose to focus on a different subject if you want to, or you can choose to blur out the background to whatever extent you want to. It's something that has been in Android phones, various Android phones for a while now. It's a nice feature to have now that we've got that in iPhone. I'm interested to see how they execute that in their software. Apple talked a lot about their new photonic engine, which is basically taking the 48 megapixel photos that you've taken and taking the best pixels from those images and combining them down to a 24 megapixel image. So this should get you better low light performance than just your full size 48 megapixel photos, as well as hopefully more detail in the photos as well. We're getting the same battery life as on the iPhone 14, which is pretty good because at least we're not losing out in battery life for a more powerful chip, which is what we're getting in the iPhone 15. So we're getting the A16 Bionic chip, which was used in the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max last year. So this is the thing that Apple started last year, where they're basically putting the chip from their previous Pro phone into their new base level iPhone. So it's good to see that they're doing this, especially if it keeps the price down on the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, then I'm all for it, because they're still powerful chips from last year. They're just not the very latest chip, basically. And finally, we have basically what everyone has been talking about in the lead up to this event, and that is USB-C on the iPhone. So this is really good to see. Finally, that Apple decided to put USB-C in their iPhone. Yes, they were pushed on by the EU, basically forcing them to do this, but either way, it's a good result for consumers, because now we can charge MacBook, we can charge iPhone, we can charge iPad, and we can charge AirPods Pro 2 with the USB-C cable, because they updated the AirPods Pro 2 or second generation with USB-C as well. So that was kind of a minor update they mentioned, but now you can charge all of those devices with USB-C, and that's amazing. The downside of this on the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus is you're only getting USB-C 2 speeds. So that's limited to 480 megabits per second, or the equivalent of 60 megabytes per second. So it's not fast, but to be honest, the majority of people who are buying the iPhone 15 or 15 Plus aren't probably going to need really high speeds on their USB-C, so it's probably fine for now. There were another few features that were announced that are available across the iPhone 15 Plus, Pro and Pro Max, and they are better quality voice calls. You can actually turn on noise cancelling, basically, when you're talking to someone else, so if they can't hear you on their end of the phone, you can turn that feature on and it'll cut out a lot of that background noise. You also get roadside assistance by satellite, so this is going to be great if you break down and you don't have any network. You can still get some sort of roadside assistance, but it is limited to certain companies, and it looks like it's only initially going to be in the USA, so bear that in mind as well. And satellite services are going to be free for 2 years with iPhone 14 and 15, which I guess is good. In terms of price, we have the iPhone 15 going for $799 in the US and £799 in the UK. And we have the iPhone 15 Plus going for $899 in the US and £899 in the UK. In the UK, this is actually a fairly big deal, because this is actually £50 cheaper than the iPhone 14 was at launch last year. So it was £849 last year, and we're getting it for £800 this year. So that's good to see for all my UK viewers. We're getting some kind of discount there, I guess. So moving on to the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, one of the main updates we're getting is we're now moving to a titanium body over the previous stainless steel. And this basically means that the body of the actual phone is going to be stronger, more durable, and much lighter. So for people who have used iPhone 14 Pros in the past, this might make a big difference. For someone who's never used an iPhone 14 Pro or anything like that, I'm not sure if you'll notice much difference here because yes, it'll be lighter, but you've got nothing to really compare it to. Similarly to the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, we get the same kind of screen sizes again, so 6.1 inches on the iPhone 15 Pro and 6.7 inches on the 15 Pro Max, and you get the same 2000 nits of peak brightness as the base level iPhone 15, but the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Maxes obviously have the 120Hz screens with ProMotion, so that's going to be setting them apart from the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus. This year we're getting 4 colors on the Pro iPhones, so black, white, blue, and natural titanium. So the natural titanium kind of just takes the color of titanium anyway, so it's kind of a metallic color. The other ones are fairly subtle as well, similar to the iPhone 15 with the glass back. We're getting kind of fairly subtle colors here. Again, I'd probably go for the black color, but if you want to leave a comment down below and let me know what color you'd go for if you're going to get one of these, then I'd be interested to know as well. We're getting a new chip on the Pro iPhones this year with the A17 Pro, and this was created using the 3nm manufacturing process, which basically means it has way more transistors for more power and more power efficiency as well. This is a really nice update. I think this is going to make a big difference to how the phone feels and how the phone runs. And the other big update that they kind of went on about quite a lot during the event was that you get a more powerful GPU as well. So in this chip, you're going to get a 6-core GPU over the 5-core of the A16, and the GPU is 20% faster with the 6 cores, and the CPU is 10% faster with the 6 cores as well. You get 4 times faster ray tracing according to Apple as well, whatever that means, and 2 times faster neural engine for machine learning as well. But the demonstrations they showed with the gaming looked really good in terms of the ray tracing and all these kind of things. What I'm quite interested about the gaming is they showed off playing things like brand new Assassin's Creed on the iPhone. Be interested to see how that plays and if it looks good, if it feels good when, with terms of frame rates and things. And I'd also be really interested to see if you can plug this into a monitor and it'll give you a full screen gaming experience to play on your iPhone. Because that could be a viable alternative to something like the Switch or the Steam Deck, for example. So it could be a really good option for mobile gaming, but it's going to be interesting to see how developers actually develop for the iPhone. If they don't tend to adopt it, then it's just not going to do very well. So I think they will, but be interested to see which games actually end up on the iPhone and how they play. One other thing that they mentioned about the A17 Pro is that you're now getting a dedicated AV1 encoder for streaming services, which is pretty good. We're also getting some fairly decent updates to the camera system on the 14 Pro and Pro Max. So first of all, we have the main 48 megapixel camera, which has a slightly larger sensor than on the iPhone 15, and it's a 24mm equivalent rather than the 26mm on the base model iPhone 15. We are stuck with the same 12 megapixel ultra wide camera at a 13mm equivalent, which could be disappointing for some people because I know that is quite a bit lower quality than the main camera. And you get a 12 megapixel telephoto lens, but it's at a different focal length whether you get the Pro or the Pro Max. So on the Pro, you'll get 3 times, which is a 72mm equivalent. And on the Pro Max, you get a 5 times, which is a 120mm equivalent. And you can see here that it's got quite a decent range of zoom. So this could be useful for people who need that bit of extra reach. And you're also getting some new optical image stabilization within the 5x telephoto so that you can get good quality, crisp photos that aren't blurred because you've had to kind of move them. They're using like a tetraprism design, which is bouncing light off inside a prism to achieve that extended kind of focal length. But I think because they're bouncing it through that much glass, it's going to affect the quality compared to, the main camera. And you're going to kind of notice that it's going to be probably lower quality. It'd be interesting to see how Apple deal with this, but I'm keen to see the results of the 120mm camera when they come out as people are testing it. So with the 15 Pro and Pro Max, Apple's saying that you have the equivalent of 7 Pro lenses in your pocket. So by that, they're breaking this down as the 0.5 times ultra wide for macro in the macro mode, so like equivalent of macro lens. You've got 30mm ultra wide again, but just not in macro mode, so you can take things like wide landscapes. You've got the 1x main camera at 24mm, which is just its standard focal length. You've got the 1x main camera, but zoomed into 1.2 times at 28mm, and this is cropped in on the sensor. Again, cropped in to 35mm is another one you can do, and cropped in 2 times telephoto to 48mm, which again, as we discussed on the iPhone 15, that is cropped in so that you end up with a 12 megapixel photo at the end of the day rather than a 24 megapixel photo. And then you have the new 5x or the 3x telephoto, depending on which you go for, the Pro or the Pro Max. So you end up with 7 kind of lenses and 6 different focal lengths. So you are cropping in the sensor, so it's not really actually 7 different focal lengths. Really interested added feature that isn't out yet, it's coming later in this year according to Apple, is spatial video capture. So spatial video was first introduced with the announcement of the Vision Pro headset, and you could capture spatial video on your headset, which looked really stupid because you'd be sitting there with like a headset on while you're at like a birthday party or something like that, which is just stupid. So it's quite good that they're bringing this to iPhone. And what it does is it uses the ultra wide in combination with the main camera to capture 3D video effectively that you can then view on your Vision Pro headset once that's announced. I'm interested to see how this works, because if they're getting to the same focal length with the ultra wide as the main camera, like 24mm, then they're going to have to crop in quite substantially to that ultra wide, which is only 12 megapixels to start with. So I'm not sure if this is going to mean that the maximum resolution is going to be like 1080p or 2K possibly, or 2.7K, sorry, possibly for that spatial video, but I'll be interested to see how that works and if they explain that a little bit more later when it's actually released onto iPhones. There's some really nice Pro video features that they've introduced with the 15 Pro and Pro Max now that it's got USB-C. So it supports recording to external drives via USB-C in ProRes, which is a really nice feature because in the past, you would shoot ProRes on an iPhone and it would fill up the iPhone's storage in about 2 seconds. So if you can shoot onto like a 4 terabyte external drive now, then you can shoot for a lot longer and it's actually more usable as an actual workflow, which is good. And you could maybe reduce the amount of storage you actually get in your iPhone, save yourself a bit of money up front, and just buy a big external drive to shoot video onto. You can also shoot that video in the log profile now, which is going to be really nice with the 10-bit video that you get on iPhone already, to allow you to actually a bit more flexibility in how your video looks, as well as the dynamic range of that video to get more information in the shadows and the highlights. So these are some really nice features, and I'm interested to see what people are going to create with the log profile combined with the 10-bit and shooting, ProRes onto external drives. You can also now instantly transfer and preview RAW photos from your iPhone on your Mac via USB-C using Capture One, which is a very professional workflow feature, and it's a nice feature to have. But I'm honestly not sure if there are many people out there who do portrait shooting in a studio who are using an iPhone to do that portrait shooting. I think most people in that kind of workflow are going to be using like a mirrorless camera and a more professional camera. But if there are people out there who use their iPhone, this is going to make that workflow a lot easier. So again, a nice feature to have now we've got USB-C, and these are the kind of things that USB-C enables. Speaking of USB-C, the USB-C port on the 15 Pro and Pro Max is far more usable than the one on the base model 15 because it supports USB 3 speeds up to 10 gigabits per second, which is actually usable for things like, ProRes video. That's kind of why it needs to be that. And just transferring any sort of large video files either onto your iPhone or off your iPhone. So that's a really nice upgrade to see, and I'm hoping that that will trickle down to the iPhone 16 in the next generation so that we get faster speeds, but we'll have to wait and see. However, there's no charging speed upgrade between the iPhone 15 Plus, Pro and Pro Max. They all are still limited to 20 watts, which is pretty disappointing to be honest. I would have hoped they would be able to add a higher charging speed with USB-C, but I imagine they didn't do this because they are still trying to encourage people to use MagSafe, so they don't really want USB-C to overshadow people using MagSafe. So I think that's why they've kind of left the charging speed exactly the same as before. You also now get a customizable action button in place of where the mute switch was on the previous iPhones. This isn't on the iPhone 15 or 15 Plus, it's only available on the Pro iPhones, but this is a really nice feature to add. By default, it does still switch between silent mode and loud, but you can customize it for a few different things that Apple has specified. So you can turn into focus mode, you can activate your camera by pressing it, activate your torch, you can do a voice memo, and a variety of other things. but you can also use Shortcut as well. So this allows you to actually open up apps, do different things all with one click of the action button, and you can really customize this. So this makes it really customizable to anything you want, which is really nice and something I didn't expect Apple to actually add in. I thought they'd keep it to very specific actions that it does, but having the ability to use Shortcut with this makes it a really good feature actually. And again, hopefully this is something that will come down to the base model iPhone 16 next year, but we'll have to wait and see. A couple of sneaky updates that they didn't really include that much in the announcement is that you now get Wi-Fi 6E on the Pro and Pro Max, whereas on the base model iPhone you just get Wi-Fi 6. So if you do have a router that supports that, you will get a lot faster Wi-Fi speeds, which is just a nice quality of life improvement again. It also has a Thread radio built in. So if you don't know what Thread is, it's basically like a mesh network for different smart devices, which is trying to be a universal kind of standard to allow more smart devices to work together, such as your Amazon devices, your Google devices, and your Apple devices. So this is apparently one of the first smartphones to have the Thread radio built in. And this wasn't really mentioned in the, as far as I'm aware, in the announcement, but it's quite nice to have this. I'm interested to see how this encourages people to adopt the Thread network and use that. So just another kind of under the radar thing that was included in the 15 Pro and Pro Max. And again, something that's not included in the iPhone 15. There weren't any updates as far as battery life is concerned. Again, as on the iPhone 15, it's the same as last year, which is fine. And in terms of price, the iPhone 15 Pro is going for $999 in the US and £999 in the UK, and that is for 128 gigabytes at the base model. The Pro Max goes up to 200 or starts at 256 gigabytes now, and that is going for $1,199 in the US and £1,199 in the UK. Again, pricing is a fairly big deal in the UK here because the iPhone 14 Pro started at £1,100 last year, so now we're getting £100 off that starting price, which is nice to see as well. And all these phones and everything that was announced is basically available to pre-order from Friday, which is when I'm recording this, and in stores on September 22nd. So if we look at the iPhone lineup now, we've got the iPhone SE at the bottom with $429, iPhone 13 for $599, iPhone 14 for $699, iPhone 15 for $799, and iPhone 15 Pro starting at $999. So they've taken away the iPhone 13 mini now. That's not an option, so you can't actually get a mini iPhone if you want one of them now, which could be really disappointing for quite a few people. But I quite like the 6.1 inch size of the base model iPhone because that's the same size as my existing Samsung phone, and I really like this size, this form factor. It's a really nice middle ground between that huge form factor and the really small form factor. This is probably what I'll try and get going forward, basically. So that's all the updates from the iPhone 15 lineup, and there's some really nice updates there, even though it's quite minor, and USB-C is a huge one. And it's a huge one in deciding if you have an Android phone, should you switch to iPhone? And that's a really big question. Something that I've been trying to answer myself because, like I said at the start, I have a Mac, I have an iPad that I use on a daily basis, but I also have an Android phone. So it's kind of frustrating because you don't have everything in tune with each other, and there's some workarounds you have to do to transfer stuff between your Android phone and your MacBook, for example, and other things like that. It can just get kind of annoying. So there have been two main things that hold me back up until this point from buying an iPhone, and those are the Lightning connector and the price. So for the Lightning connector, I just didn't want another cable to have to remember to take with me everywhere I go, because I would 100% forget it and then not have any way of charging my phone. Whereas I've always got a USB-C cable with me for everything, because I charge my MacBook with USB-C, charge my iPad, I charge my headphones, and I charge my phone with USB-C. So I only need one cable at the moment, and I want it to keep that way. So that's been solved now with USB-C being introduced into the iPhone, but the price is still pretty high. Although I don't think it's the wrong price for the iPhone. I think the iPhone is clearly a really well-built product that gets support for a long period of time. And I think that that's worth the price that you pay for it. But I'm just not willing to pay that price, and that's my main issue. There are a few other things that I realized that I take for granted with my current setup, and I'm not sure I could deal without having those features. So I use the Samsung S22 currently, and this is a really nice phone for the features you get, but there's a few major downsides which I really don't like about this phone. But first of all, it has a 120Hz screen, which I absolutely love. I've kind of got used to it now, and obviously moving to an iPhone 15 would mean you'd miss out on that unless you upgraded to the 15 Pro, and you're paying a grand for a phone, which I'm just not willing to do at this point. The main problem with the Samsung S22 is the fact that it uses an Exynos chip, and this is because I've got the European version. So the US version uses the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, and that means you get some decent kind of efficiency and you don't have too many issues with battery life. But the battery life on this phone is absolutely terrible. It's probably one of the worst battery life phones I've ever used in my life, and it means I have to charge it like multiple times a day. I'm not even kidding, which is just shocking. The next thing you have on this is fast charging, and that's something I really like about this, is you get fast charging up to 30 watts, which is not super fast, but it's a lot faster than 20 watts that you're limited to on iPhone. And I'm not sure I could go back to slow charging at this point because I'm so used to it, but if you didn't have to charge your phone 12 times a day, then you might not need the fast charging, so there's that as well. But then the other thing is ecosystems. So I'm basically sandwiched between two ecosystems right now. So I've got obviously the MacBook, I've got the iPad, but I've got a Android phone, I have Sony earbuds like LinkBuds S, and I have a Samsung Galaxy Watch 4 smartwatch, which is obviously not going to work with an iPhone. So it's difficult because if I bought an iPhone, I would then have to probably switch to using an Apple Watch because I'm used to my smartwatch now and I use it all the time and I love having it and I use all the features on it really. I would feel like I'd have to get an Apple Watch, and that's another added thing to invest in when you buy that phone. So it ends up being a much larger investment than just the phone, if that makes sense. So for me, I'm not switching to iPhone at this point, but it's exciting to see the updates, however small they are this year. The camera updates like log shooting and the ability to use external SSDs with the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max are pretty awesome from a videography point of view. So while I'm not switching to iPhone for a little while, it might be more compelling next year when the new iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pros come out, because the iPhone 15 will then be reduced in price and it might be a more compelling option for me in terms of that from that price perspective. But at this moment, I'm not willing to jump into that due to the price that will cost me basically. But if you don't have an Android smartwatch and you just have an Android phone and non-AirPods earphones, such as like the Sony LinkBuds S, for example, I think you can now get away with switching to iPhone if you're happy not needing the Apple Watch. I have got used to using my smartwatch, and that's why I would kind of want to get an Apple Watch as well, because I'd be missing out by switching to iPhone at this point. But you could definitely get away with using non-AirPods, like wireless earbuds with your iPhone. It just wouldn't be quite as well integrated as if you had AirPods. But AirPods is always something you can maybe upgrade to later if you wanted to. But fundamentally, switching to iPhone will almost certainly give you like a longer lasting phone with the 5 years of updates and security patches that Apple offers. And the fact they're all really integrated with the software means that it will still be running well in 5 years. Whereas an Android phone often ends up being slow after about 3 or 4, 2 or 3 years, which is not great. So you would have slightly less customization than on Android, and you would miss out on some excellent Android features that you might be completely used to, such as the built-in Google Assistant, for example, which is excellent. So while I'm absolutely tempted by iPhone, I don't think for me it's the right time to switch, but it's certainly a more viable and compelling option than it has been in the past, with Lightning now being gone and us being rid of that, which is really good to see. But do you currently use Android? Because if you do, I'd love to hear from you in the comments on whether you're planning on switching to iPhone now that we've got USB-C on there, or if you want to wait it out a little bit longer and why. So let me know in the comments and I'd love to start a conversation with you down there. Otherwise, that's been this episode of Tech Focus, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Cheers.